or good evening, depending on where you are, and welcome to our pre-counter summit against this year's NATO summit in Ankara. In our first session, we will talk about US global strategy, what it means for NATO. My name is Christine Karch. I'm a founding member of the international network No to War, No to NATO. Since 2009, we are active together with local partners against NATO summits, mostly with counter summits in the last years. We provide sometimes peace camps, demonstrations, and direct actions. On August 7th and 8th, NATO defense ministers and head of states will meet in Ankara for the 39th NATO summit, the second in Turkey. The summit of the largest military organization ever is a crisis and war summit. It continues to drive the expansion of armaments and militarization in a situation where, according to CIPRI, more than half of the global military spending of approximately 2.9 trillion US dollars is driven by the 32 NATO members with 1,581 billion US dollars. The US alone spends 954 billion US dollars, more than other NATO members combined. Germany is the greatest military power in Europe. The 5% GDP target is to become mandatory for all members. More money is being demanded for the arms industry to produce more weapons and develop newer and better ones, which leads also to the further militarization of science and enlarge the dual-use capabilities. And of course, Ukraine will continue to be supported, even by the withdrawal of Trump. The best way to help end the war and secure a just and lasting peace is to ensure that Ukraine can participate in any negotiations from a position of strength, and NATO allies are stepping up to ensure that Ukraine has the support it needs. In this session, we will discuss US global strategy, what it means to NATO. With Firuze Tana, Anu Genoy, and Rainer Braun. Each have maximum 12 minutes to speak, and afterwards we will have participation of the audience. And of course, we will hear now our next speaker, Anu Genoy. She is professor and political analyst, is a member of the No to War, No to NATO network, adjunct professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs, Jindal Global University, India, and affiliated with Asia European People's Forum, with IPP and Transnational Institute. She has written many books, monographs, and articles in the domain of security studies, development studies, gender studies, and critical international issues. Anu, the floor is to you.
Thank you, friends from No to NATO. Solidarity to our Turkish organizers. I'm going to speak on the US global strategy in this post-unipolar world. Of course, the US is not disguising its desires for hemispheric dominance. And the US current strategy for dominance is actually accelerated It is blunt, it is transactional, it's unapologetic about the use of force, it's more personalized than ever before. Now, this indicates both a desperation of a declining power and an increase in domestic oligarchic capitalist control, a decrease in accountability, and an increase in the gap between citizens and policymakers in the US and world over. So the US is not willing to accept strategic autonomy from its allies and expects an open display of hierarchic, vassalized relations. It seeks regime change, especially in the Western Hemisphere, as the Venezuela operations showed, but there was a failure, happily for us, in Iran. So the reality is that hegemonic power is disrupted. It's not the same as earlier. And I'm going to give 6 very quick reasons of why hegemonic power is disrupted. One is the rise of China and the American recognition of its inability to contain China economically and militarily, evident in the Trump-Xi Jinping constructive strategic stability arrangement. 2, Russia's ability to hold off the NATO proxy war of attrition from both sides against Ukraine. 3, Iran's defensive capability and strategic win, which has led to a completely new equation and changed security architecture in the Middle East. 4th, the rise of middle powers who have the capability of strategic hedging. And they have the capability, but they may not necessarily do it, but they do have the capability of resisting US diktats. 5th, there is the rise of regional and plurilateral non-militarist organizations like the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the increased agency of various powers and regional groupings. And I'll give you just one recent example. That is on 17th June, just a few days ago, there was a meeting between all of the ASEAN countries as ASEAN and Vladimir Putin in Kazan on June 17 with deliverables of cooperation like the ASEAN-Russian Comprehensive Plan of Action and a clear message that ASEAN will not accept a Russia-free ASEAN, that they are free to engage with China, with the US, and with Russia. So this didn't go down too well with you-know-who. So there is therefore, 6, the ability of even small states who can exercise agency. They can balance between powers, and Iran has given them that heft. For example, Pakistan can strategically hedge between China and the US. Vietnam is partnering with Vietnam, Russia, and China. Mongolia between Russia and China, and so on. So the US has a strategic shift which is visible, and I believe it is more visible. And because we are talking about NATO, I'm going to talk about the US shift in its strategy with NATO and with its allies. So here, number one, the US has shifted from a collective security arrangement to security deals. So there is a changed relation, in my view, from alliance to one of US hegemony within the alliance. 3, the US strategy for NATO and its allies outside NATO in the global south, its allies in the global south, is the burden sharing mechanism in different ways, pushing allies to increase military spending, where the US gets benefits of weapon sales and reindustrialization of the US. The US strategy of extending, which extends to non-NATO partners. For example, its tariff deals with Korea, Japan, India, each of whom will invest billions of dollars in the US. So the US is making a tribute system in exchange for not even providing security, but security sharing. So it gets a double benefit of tribute and sharing security. So we can talk of this as US's strategy of low-cost hegemony. Fourth, the US has de-linked, you might have seen, its Indo-Pacific theater to just the Pacific Command called the PASCOM. So it's no longer the Indo-Pacific Command because the priority, of course, of the main theater is in the Pacific because both Russia and China shore it. And here, Japan, Korea, and to a lesser effect, Philippines are not just US bases, but they're now partners in defense and frontline states against China. Third, the Indian Ocean has now become a separate command where US interests in the Indian Ocean and the Persian Gulf are linked since the Iran war. And bases like in Diego Garcia, from where the B-52 bombers flew to Iran, most of them shot down by Iran, are being refortified. So six, therefore, there is a crisis of legitimacy within and about NATO and a crisis of narrative about NATO. And the destruction of Gaza would not have been possible without NATO. And you can see how citizens and people across the world are critical of this, even if their governments are not saying so. As you know, Chancellor Merz said, Israel is doing our job. And therefore, there is a crisis of operational efficiency of this alliance system, where Europe is pushing for strategic autonomy and reserves for their frontier countries. It has differences with the US on dealing with China. But I'm still arguing that NATO is not in decline, but an appendage to US low-cost hegemony. However, NATO is not just a security organization. Of course, primarily it is a war organization, an imperialist front, but it's also a geo-economic structure because it functions with the World Bank and the IMF for creating long-term dependencies, debt traps for the global South, forcing privatization for the global South, unfair trade deals. And any opposition to these rules of the US and NATO combined leads to threats, frozen assets, sanctions, blockades, regime change. We've all felt it repeatedly in the global South. But I feel now this can also be imposed on the smaller European states. So Europe has to watch out. So US has a strategy for four dominances, four types of dominance. And all of these can be questioned. The first dominance is energy dominance. But I don't believe it's fully possible anymore because Iran, in just the last 2 weeks after the Strait of Hormuz opened, exported 48 million barrels of oil to Asia. The GCC, the Gulf Cooperation countries, are diversifying. Russia is exporting even more. So I don't think the UN can shut this down without causing a global crisis. And these countries are not willing to listen. They do negotiate with the US. The US is not out of the picture, but they have more leverage. Second is the AI and tech dominance, for which the US needs rare earths and minerals and this new digital colonialism of countries which use their cloud and servers and their mail, etc., which is extracting our data and our culture. But this is also challenged by China and growing AI countries which are using their own AI. The third dominance is weapon dominance sales. But there also there's a diversification, so it cannot be complete. And the fourth is a financial dollar dominance, which was very much there in the unipolar movement, but is challenged today. For instance, Russia, China, India, the Gulf countries, and even Japan and ASEAN, they're trading with each other in national currencies. This does not mean de-dollarization or an end to the dollar, but with a multipolar world, you're going to have multiple currencies and multiple economic channels. So in conclusions, I have 4 conclusions and one last recommendation. Conclusion 1, the US has turned NATO and its allies into a weaponized interdependence. 2, US-NATO strategies are changing relations from one between allies to one between hegemon and vassals within the NATO bloc, leave alone outside. That's also there. 3, there are old and new forms of colonial interdependence where there is a hierarchy of also co-opted stakeholders within our own regimes, where NATO and US allies, especially from the right sector, and these transnational corporations are linked. 4th, NATO is not ruptured, but is in decline, just like the US is in decline. And Trump has shown that the US is unreliable and inconsistent. It could undermine and weaponize any relationship, including within NATO. So relations with the US need to be restructured and be wary. And lastly, I conclude by saying that there are new layers in the international political system that promote plurality and alternatives. This is not a smooth run. There will be back and forthing, but there are multipolar and regional nodes and networks. There is the Russia, Iran, China leverage, and other strategic hedging is possible. The gap between regimes and people is increasing, and this gives people's movements, peace movements, and others new openings which we can take advantage of. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anu, for your contribution. And you are exact in time, and I'm very interested what now Rainer will talk to as the next speaker. Rainer is the NATO founding member and is from IPB. He is a long-time German peace activist, journalist, and historian. He has been actively involved in the peace movement since 1982. He is former IPP president and actual board member of IPP. Rainer, the floor is to you.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you, Anu, for making it much easier for me to speak, because I can immediately continue what you were starting and have not to repeat anything about the changes in the world. What does this mean, these changes for Europe and above all for the European Union? That is the key point of my lecture. First of all, I would say there are 2 consequences of what Anu is saying for Europe. The first consequence is a new burden sharing in NATO between the US and Europe and the European Union, Europe. And the second is the development of the European Union to a so-called NATO light. I will bring arguments for both of it. But first, the US will keep the dominance in NATO against the European Union's countries. Mainly and first by satellites, command and control system, and by the whole infrastructure, is impossible without the US military machine. European Union countries are depending from these satellite command and control and infrastructure sections. You can see this when you're looking at Ramstein. You can see this when you are looking at Wiesbaden or at all European NATO headquarters. The second is the weapon selling is continuing in the European Union, mainly from the US, even when Europe wants to be more independent. I will come back to this later. Rutte announced proudly when he was sitting next to Trump that Europe will buy for 300 billion weapons in the United States. So the weapon systems are mainly continuing depending from the US. Third, even when the US gave up some political and military positions in NATO, the main positions in NATO are occupied by US officers and generals. All the chiefs of the different commands are US guys. And fourth, Europe is deeply depending from the tech dominance of the United States. In all these tech questions, European Union is playing in German, I would say, the second Bundesliga, not even the first Bundesliga. They are so weak in all these questions. This is the reality. And then the European Union countries announced, because of Trump and the changes in the world, that Europe must become more autonomous. And they are trying to do something. But the key point for me to discuss about European Union is to say, generally, there is a huge difference between what Europe wants and what Europe can do. This is the really big difference. The European Union politics is totally unrealistic, illusionary, and has nothing to do with the political, social realities of the different countries. I think you have always have in mind when some of the European Union leaders are announcing something, that it is more or less a wish or a dream and has really less to do with the political reality. In the reality, the European Union in NATO has still the role of vassals and are deeply depending from the United States. But this does not exclude to say that what the European Union militarization is now happening is a really danger for the world. What's happened with the European Union militarization? First of all, till 2013, the European Union will spend 800 billion for the so-called rearm project in Europe. This is a huge amount of money and is in addition to the national budget. And the national budget should go up till to 5%. These 5% for Germany mean 5% including debts, that every second euro of the national budget will either go to debts or to military. You can imagine what this means for social purposes in the country. The social infrastructure will be totally destroyed. The second are common European military projects. They have a long list of 34 military projects that they want to develop during the next time, or that they start developing. Third, they have an ammunition program, which will bring till 2028, till 2028, 1.5 billion. Then there is a European military industry, what they want to develop. And again, by this military industry, I want to show what they want and what they can. They want to develop a new air fighter, General 6 of air fighters, mainly from Germany and France. But they failed because they could not agree about the profit of these fighters. The same it is my perception, will happen with the tanks. We are now not having one military tank, what was the aim. We have the development of 3 different European military tanks. And this shows that they wish to have a European defense industry, and the reality is really a big difference. But I want to underline, this does not make it less dangerous. The third is the military research in Europe. They have a program till 2027, about 9 billion for a program which is called Precatory Action for Defense Research. We have a European drones production, and we are developing a common arms export and rules for common arms exports, which allow the export all over the world and reduced rules for arms export dramatically. This shows the way European Union is going. And in addition, a very dangerous development is European nuclear weapons. They have in mind to develop own European nuclear weapons. They have in mind to enlarge the nuclear umbrella. France, Norway is only one example up to now. And they're also discussing a new nuclear sharing, maybe with Finland, maybe with Poland. All of this is directly oriented against the United States and definitely very dangerous. So this together means that they are doing everything to enlarge their military purposes, but they are doing it from a defensive position because Europe, and this is my final words in the analytical part, lost a big part of their influence in the world. 1980, the worldwide industrial production, 25% were coming from Europe. Now, only 9%. And when you are looking to the trade in the world, we have quite the same figures. Europe is a loser of the global changes, and the reaction is to militarize, which is a very dangerous, also very illusionary way. What is the alternative? The alternative is to put together very easy. It is the politics of common security. Europe, from my point of view, has only a chance in the new world order when it will have strong relations with Russia, work together with Russia by their common interests. This has many things to do with energy. It has many things to do with the big market in Russia. It has many things to do with the geostrategic and geographic picture of Europe, because you can do whatever you want. Russia is a part of Europe. You cannot change the landscape, even when Macron and Merz would love to do it. So this means the chance of Europe lies in a politics of common security. Common security means the security to take the interests of your side and the interests of the other side and put it together in a common way of understanding, cooperation, dialogue, and negotiation. Where you don't agree today, maybe you can agree in 1 or 2 years and in the future. That was a policy for Willy Brandt and Egon Bahr, and it was very successful for a peaceful development of Europe. Concrete and today means this. We have to start to discuss again, what does this mean, trust building between Russia and the European Union? There is a deep mistrust from both sides. And to come together to trust building means we have to develop new contacts again. We have to speak again. We have to find the telephone numbers, have first contacts, maybe have first economic contacts and relations, have to think how we can discuss it. And there's a big role for the peace movement and the social movements. They have to be with the diplomacy from the ground to be the avant-garde of developing these contracts. And this is the huge change. And at the end, and Anu was also not speaking about the end of NATO today, at the end, when we are coming to a new common security, we can also overcome the military blocks, including NATO, because NATO is too expensive, too old for a new world order. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rainer, for your contribution. And we have now, I think, about 20 minutes for questions. Please raise your hands with a little heart in the bottom of the application, and additional mention the question in the chat that the speakers can understand it clear and can answer. So now I'm looking for the hands.
I knew we killed them.
I couldn't see any hands.
Anu, then I ask you a question, Anu. You were speaking about all these changes, and I absolutely agree. But I think we should also mention that there are some backslashes for progressive forces. Above all, I think in Latin America. What's happening in Latin America is not the way of a multipolar world. It is again the way of developing a hegemon and vassals. How do you see this? I agree with you that the tendency to multipolar cannot be changed any longer, but there are also, losing situations for us in these developments.
No, you're absolutely right. I think that pink wave, which was there, is really declining, and a lot of countries, they're seeing a lot of money pouring in from the US, CIA, and interventions. But there's also a class of people. And I can tell you one thing, Raina, the Global South is not some wonderful place without without a right wing. Or they're the writers, they're pro-imperialists, they're the corporations, they are the ones who are comprador, and the progressive forces are quite small. But at the same time, there is a nationalism which brings the global south together. They've seen multipolarity helps them. And even in Argentina or Brazil, even when there's a right wing, they don't stop collaborating with forces of multipolarity like China, etc. They continue the trade. The material basis for multipolarity are there in all these regimes also. And they keep shifting. So if currently, they're going towards voting in right-wing governments who would be close, let's say, to the regime, they can shift also anytime. But there are other also several questions which I can take. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Anu. We have now two hands. The first one is Jimmy Gomery. Takes the floor.
Hi, yes, very interesting. I'm tuning in from, oh, you can't see me in the thing. That's forgot about this. Okay. Yeah, I put tape on it. Paranoid. I'm calling from Montreal, Canada. I'm the coordinator of Montreal for World Beyond War. And I have a couple questions. Like you talked about, I think Reiner said something about Europe needs to work with Russia and to come to terms with Russia and have a common security or arrangement. But as you know, I mean, when the US blew up the pipeline between Russia and Germany, Germany still didn't do anything. So I don't see Germany, coming in having a tete-a-tete with anyone in Russia anytime soon. But might Iran be a way to facilitate or an alliance with one of the Russia-friendly nations? Could Germany come in through like a third-party mediator type of thing? Because I like your idea. I think that's a great idea. I just wonder how, practically speaking, it could happen.
Yes, thank you.
I have another question, but I'll leave it.
I think we should go all the others, and then Anu and Rainer can answer. The next one is Gabriele Prohaska.
Okay. A question to Rainer. Do you have concrete suggestions for diplomacy from the ground as to trust building, etc.? Thank you.
The next one is Ingvar Ronbeck.
Yes, Ingvar Ronbeck from Sweden. As you know, Sweden has become a member of NATO. We have also signed defense cooperation agreement, and also now also supported the military use of the Swedish territory for other countries. And it's extremely little space for providing alternatives regarding security policy in Sweden today, I'm sad to say. Could you have some recommendation? What is the best argument that could resonate well? Because all political parties has going into this militarization bandwagon in Sweden. And we have not been in this situation before. And now we have to take a big fight that we has never done before, almost. What would be the three key arguments that we can use as civil society engagement? I'm myself working in an independent think tank in the northern part of Sweden with advisors from different parts of the world, also the global south. I think we need to help each other, and therefore I think it's interesting to hear what you are saying about good arguments.
Yes, thank you, Ingvar. The next one is Guido. van Limput.
Good afternoon, good evening. I'm Guido van Limput from the Netherlands, Amsterdam. And I have a question which is actually for both of the speakers, although it's stressing the expressions of Rainer about his proposal to have common security initiatives in Europe, I guess, especially in reference to Egon Bahr and Willy Brandt. But isn't it necessary as a program to have a common security all over the world? Especially as Arnaud gave us a picture of what's happening all around the world, and what could be a scheme or a program to do it. And as Willy Brandt and Egon Bahr were very much from the past, who has to take the initiative for common security globally? Thank you.
Okay, so I think Anu and Rainer can now answer the questions.
Okay, so I think most of the questions are to Rainer related to European common security, and I would suggest that you do try and read the work that IPB has done on common security. It gives a lot of indications of how to move forward. They are reworking on European common security to bring in a more updated version, as well as one on the importance of common security in Asia. But I think I'm very interested in what, our comrade from Sweden said about key arguments against militarism. And I think that's a very important question you have raised, and a suggestion you have made of how we should actually proceed about making key arguments against this rising militarism. Because Europe, was comparatively free of it compared to the rest of us who've seen it. And I would suggest or say that militarism will go against all the ideas of the Renaissance. It'll go against the ideas of liberal internationalism and liberalism within. It will go against your own culture because it will replace it with a culture of militarism. It's extremely dangerous because it intersects with nationalism, and it co-opts the women's movement, it co-opts the trade unions, and you could see an end to all those. So if you just compare your own societies with societies which have undergone militarism, whether it's Pinochet's regimes, Chile, Peru, India, which has its own type of militarism, and how it brings in the extreme right, and it's very difficult to go back for him, because it's not of course it's about the fact that military expenditures increase and your social expenditures and social welfare declines, which Europeans are so used to, but it undoes your culture irrevocably without getting it back, and all the best ideals of European culture are at risk with this militarism. I don't know if people even understand the risk that is being taken with this militarism, because it's about militarization of civil spaces, the justification of the use of force in civil society, between relations between men and women, parents and children. It all gets militarized slowly and you don't realize it. So, I mean, I think we should build these arguments, and it's very important. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Anu. Rainer.
Thank you all for the questions. First of all, Guido, we need a common security approach for the whole world. IPB was doing this with others, but I think in the same way important are regional approaches and regional strategies for common security. IPB was with others were developing one to the Indo-Pacific Ocean, and we definitely need this for West Asia and for other parts of the world, because the political, social, also military situation in the different parts of the world are different. So we need also regional answers to common security. And this is the work the peace activists and other groups have to do for the future and have to continue doing. Second, Ingmar, when there would be one argument which could convince in this militarization discussion, I think the guy who had this argument should immediately get the Nobel Peace Prize. because this would be so important to do. I think it's a long way to go against the confrontation and hate policy of our government and of the political leading classes. The first and key point which we always have to do is to argue against the lie that Russia will attack Europe and show the military relations and the military power structure between Russia and even the European Union NATO countries. There's a new study from Greenpeace which shows that alone the European Union NATO military budget and NATO military development and NATO military machines are stronger than the Russian military machine, excluding the United States. Then we have to show what are the consequences of this militarization. The social dimension of the consequences, I think we still underestimate. We will have a totally other, un-welfare Europe when the militarization will take this way like the political leading class wants to go. And these are our key arguments. The consequences are for everyone in Europe who has children for school, for the kindergarten, for social welfare, for working places. And the militarized industry complex will not win because there are much less working places and they will raise inflations and. So the consequences are so dramatic that I think we have to put these consequences and argue for this with in the discussion about against the militarization. Third, what can we do as peace movement? The first work of the peace movement is to bring the arguments for peace to the public. That we must do much more than in the past. You know, we have to come out of our rooms, of our meeting places, and go again to the people where the people are living and staying, and argue for our position and convince and try to convince people which are influenced by the hateful media which they are seeing day to day. You know, I have not to speak about the role of media to you, but we have to go to the people. The second is in relation to Russia. We have, like in the 70s, developed the context to Russia from the ground, from the sport club to the sport clubs, from the music center to the music center, from trade unions to trade unions, and also from peace groups to social organizations, social groups in Russia. This means we have to do an exchange. Now we have, for the first time in this exchange, we have Zoom. The last time we don't have Zoom when we were developing it, we had to do it by letter and maybe by fax. Now we have better chances to do, and I can only underline this, even when it is difficult, we have to go to Moscow and the other cities in Russia to speak with the people, to get the context, and to try to develop common projects with our Russian friends. There is no alternative about this development of the peoples to peoples contact for the future. To the first question here, the political forces in Europe are more or less anti-Russian forces. There are some less examples. So we have to work together with the minorities in some parties, for example, Social Democratic Party, Left Party, which is in favor of a policy of common security. And we have to develop common strategies and common activities with them. And again, it will not happen tomorrow. We are in Europe in this fight in such a defensive position I could never imagine over my last 30 years. But that is the reality, and we have to come out of this defensive position in working together with all these people and political forces which are in favor of peaceful relations to Russia. There are more than we are expecting. And when we are doing this offensive and have discussion with them, I was in Moscow in April, and I made afterwards a lot of lectures and even some media reports about it. And it was interesting how many positive reactions I got to all these reports. So the people don't want to have this hate. They are mistrust, and some of them are influenced, but we can bring them back to a more peaceful policy. That is, I think, our work. And the role of peace movement in history, and I can say this from the IPB point of view, was never easy. But we are now in this difficult situation even more forced than in the past.
Yeah, thank you, Rainer, for your comments. And I would have a question to you. What can we do to get to a peaceful solution with Ukraine? Because I think this is also a problem here in Germany, and because they always thinking they have to support Ukraine and no, don't because they are afraid of Russia and the lie that Russia will come.
You know, we have to strengthen the position that only diplomacy can help out of the way. And we need from our countries and from the European diplomat initiatives, not only war initiatives. That is what we can call for. And in the country itself, we can only try to change the atmosphere more in the direction of peace, that it is for social conditions, for fighting against militarization, the most important point that we are coming to negotiations and peace. The European Union is the main war driver in the war in Ukraine. And so we have to try to stop it in our countries where we can. And the first step is that we have to fight against arms export to Ukraine, and that we have to call for diplomacy, and that we have to develop new powers for these positions. There is no alternative to this. But frankly speaking, peace in Ukraine is a point which is coming for me, and this is now a word to Anu, more or less from the global south. The global south must, from my point of view, must put much more efforts and power for a peaceful solution. This means China must be, from my point of view, more active in the diplomacy way, the same to Brazil and others. When the global south is saying, now stop it, then there is a bigger chance that we are coming to peace. The European Union movements, we can support these activities. The powers in Europe which are for peace can support this, but the main pressure, I think, must come more from the global south. It was in the beginning of the war much stronger, and now because of the frustration that it took so long, I'm missing new initiatives from the global south. This is not a critic to the government. This is a position where we need their help and their solidarity to overcome a horrible situation, because I agree with Christine, peace cold peace in Ukraine would change the world situation dramatically, and would give us new chances for peaceful processes all over the world.
Anu, you will have the final words about these questions.
Yeah. I agree with the general trend of the conversation and with Rainer and everyone. But what I'd say about Ukraine is that, the global south, I think, functions with signs and signals. They've all said, repeatedly in every meeting where Lavrov or Putin has been present, because I track these meetings, where they've always said, look, we support diplomacy and you should go in for diplomacy. And they have said that in return. But they have always, I think the global south has no problems with Russia. Maybe that's a problem. They don't want to, they have never isolated it. They have opposed sanctions. They're the ones who've sustained the economy in a way. India and China, in a huge way, taking the oil. There might have been transfer of weapons for all you know. I don't know. I don't think the ships which bring oil go back empty. But they also do not intervene in the affairs of other states. That's their old policy. So they're not telling the US and Europe stop funding Ukraine. They're not saying that why aren't you looking at, aren't there fascist forces functioning in Ukraine? Because it comes in our newspaper of how they are behaving. Of how they're forcing people to fight and what is happening within Ukraine. I don't think the global south can say, though I do believe it, that you should freeze the conflict and immediately get onto the diplomatic table. though most of the countries of the Global South have said this repeatedly. But the Global South has no central command. It's not like NATO. It doesn't have that kind of leverage. It doesn't function in the same way as NATO. It's never been hegemonic. It's a plural. It doesn't impose its will on anyone. Even within ASEAN, they take a year for a decision to come so that it works on consensus. In the United Nations, they have said this repeatedly, that we would like to see peace. So actually, it depends on the US and Europe, who are, if they withdraw funding, this would go to the diplomatic table in a day. But if they're promising billions and trillions and say that, just a few more days and Russia will collapse and everything will be fine, Russia's on the work, because there is a false narrative. And I think Europe and the US are victims of their own false narrative. And you'd be closer than we are to knowing what it is. But even what we can see from the papers, from podcasts, and just listening to what the Russians are saying, we can see that this war can go on for much longer, and it will destroy everyone. It will not just destroy Russia, it will destroy maybe Europe before it destroys Russia. Russia is a very different culture. Rainer goes there often. I have been there and studied it quite a lot. It's very different than Europe, and Europe needs to stop denying geography.
Yeah.
Thank you very much to Anu, and of course also to Rainer. And it was for me a very interesting discussion and fruitful, and we have a lot to do to really get to peaceful solutions also in our own home countries to overcome this hate against Russia. Yeah. Now I will hand over to Kate for the second part.
Thanks very much, Christina, and thanks to our speakers so far. Welcome to part 2 of our online counter summit, entitled The New International Situation, How the Elites Are Reacting. Well, of course, the short answer is rapid militarization of our societies on all levels. So today we're asking, how far will European leaders go with rearmament and the militarization of our societies? What political and economic reorganization will they pursue? In education, for example, in industry? What will result from their war readiness ideology? And of course, their construction of China and Russia as enemy stereotypes. So big questions. So I'm delighted to welcome our speakers to address these issues. They will each speak for a maximum of 8 minutes, and then of course, over to you, everybody. You can put your questions in the chat box or raise your hand after the speakers. So first of all, I'm delighted to welcome Laetitia Planche from France. She's an active member of Le Mouvement de la Paix, the French peace movement. She's a member of its secretariat and is responsible for disarmament issues. Welcome, Laetitia.
Thank you, Kate. My network is bad, so perhaps I would have to turn off my camera. It's good for you?
Yeah,
Yes.
Fine, go ahead.
You hear me? Yes? Okay. Okay. Greetings to all pacifists, and thanks for your invitation. Much has already been said regarding the general situation. I will therefore focus directly the situation in France. Amidst the process of realignment, Germany is amassing economic, financial, and military capabilities and seeking to impose its approach by becoming the leading conventional army on the European pillar of NATO, according to the German defense minister. In response, France is attempting to counter Germany by pursuing a dangerous policy of escalation with a view towards confrontation with Russia. It is using the threat of war to regain leverage within the European Union's international power dynamics, effectively accepting the shift of the war burden from the USA to Europe. The French president's speech in July the 1st, 2025, confirms the subordination of France's defense policy to the dictates of Donald Trump, formalized at the NATO summit in The Hague, as well as to the interests of shareholders in the arms industry. French military policy is characterized by an all-professional military combined with voluntary military service, a new theory of forward nuclear deterrence aimed at 9 European countries: Germany, Belgium, Denmark, Greece, Netherlands, Poland, United Kingdom, Sweden, Norway, involving an increase in the number of nuclear warheads, the total count of which will no longer be made public. These decisions run entirely counter to France's commitments under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. This Europeanization of forward deterrence, the closer alignment with the British nuclear posture, the Northwood Agreement, which is dependent on the United States, and the creation of a Franco-German nuclear steering group pose a threat to the all European peoples. A 2024 and 2023 military progress, the budget rises from the previous 285 billion to 413 billion over 7 years, a 40% increase. Additionally, a supplementary allocation of 36 billion was under discussion in the National Assembly, with the Senate pushing for as much as 50 billion. The supplementary funding measure was passed on July the 1st by an overwhelming majority of lawmakers, except for the deputies from the radical left, the Communists, and the Greens. The establishments within the framework of this military programming law of a national security alert state that can be triggered by a simple decree of ground of international security, and the facilitation of the use of private military companies. Government communications, along with all its media and economic mouthpieces, are being mobilized to gain acceptance for the policy and the new sacrifice demanded of the population regarding public services and indeed beyond. The aim is to cast Russia as the enemy. For instance, General Mandon spoke at the Mayors Congress in November 2025. His speech is highly emblematic of the mindset currently being fostered in France. It was the first time a general had spoken in such a context. He identified Russia as the primary military risk factor for European security. He noted that a power's strength does not rely solely on its military. According to him, a strong nation rests on 3 pillars: effective armed forces, an economy capable of sustaining of prolonged effort, a population psychologically prepared for hardship. The term resilience comes up constantly. One sentence in the speech particularly shocked public opinion. This phrase, "We must accept the loss of our children and economic suffering. If we are not prepared for that, then we are at risk." A part of this same effort to prepare the population for war, the Blanchet Bill of January 2026 aims to foster a genuine defense culture among young people. The security of peoples is only guaranteed if the security of neighboring peoples is also assured. Security is, therefore, a shared of collective matter. This underscores the urgent need to initiate a Europe of chosen geometry, wherein necessary European cooperation is built upon the interests of the people. It offers a way to challenge existing European treaties and break with the liberal and Atlantic logic. To the end, it is also time to France to withdraw from NATO and orchestrate its deletion. France has the capacity to prepare for a short-term withdrawal from the integrated military command structure, as was the case between 1966 and 2009. Today, France's stance regarding a US disengagement from Europe offers an opportunity to reopen the debate. France possesses the necessary capabilities. There have not been US troops stationed in France since 1966. Its nuclear deterrent is entirely independent, and it maintains its own military intelligence agency established in 1992 following the First Gulf War. Preparing for a complete exit from NATO, that is, from the Atlantic Alliance, entails military preparation and the establishment of European cooperative frameworks, political preparation, specifically the creation of an European collective security zone, the development of an independent defense industrial and technological base. The withdrawal from and dissolution of NATO is therefore being considered initially and immediately through a withdrawal from NATO's integrated command and the denunciation of Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty.
Letitia, you've had 8 minutes now.
Okay. Okay. The conclusion, 1 minute, implies building the Helsinki Accords of our time, that is a policy of detente based on the recognition of inviolability of borders and the territorial integrity of states, the renunciation of the threats and use of force, the peaceful settlement of disputes, non-interference in the internal affairs of the other states, respect for human rights and fundamental freedom, equality of rights, and the right to the self-determination of people. Thanks for your attention.
Thanks very much indeed, Letitia. Sorry to have to draw you to a close there, just to make sure we have enough time at the end for discussion. So moving on swiftly to our next speaker, I'm very pleased to welcome Michael von der Schulenburg from Germany. He's a member of the European Parliament and he focuses on issues of peace, security and international order. He previously held senior positions at the UN and in other international organizations, primarily in conflict and crisis situations. Welcome, Michael. You need to unmute, Michael. Can you unmute? We can't hear you.
He needs to unmute. Please click unmute, Michael. Yeah.
Stumm deaktivieren. Oh, I was stumm.
That's it. Good. Go.
Okay. Can you see? I don't see myself anymore, but that's not important. Let me just say, I find the discussion about Ukraine, about Russia, and about the EU are extremely important. And maybe one other day we should talk about this. But to the questions you have, I'm not a specialist on NATO, and I don't really think that we can answer these questions, and especially not me. But I think we have to say that when NATO meets now the next days in a summit, that NATO is at a profound and existential crisis, and that the deep troubles NATO faces, I don't see any possibility that at the NATO summit in Turkey they could come anyway close even to solve them and to find a new way for their future. So we see a NATO which is in decline. What doesn't mean that the NATO is not dangerous. I think often of the NATO as a dinosaur who comes in a world that doesn't really belong anymore to, but that a dinosaur that is very dangerous to us all. Why is it so difficult for NATO to make any decisions? First of all, because there are these wars. There's first of all the Iran war that the United States has lost by any means. Whatever comes in the long term, it weakens the United States. We have the Ukraine war, and we are losing the Ukraine war too. I'm absolutely convinced about these things, even maybe this year. And Israel has not been able to win any of its wars, and it will have an existential challenge by the end of the year, how they deal with all these wars in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, and of course also in Syria and so on, and then of course with Iran. These are geopolitical important wars. They are not like Afghanistan, where we can just say go away, say close it and go away. This will have an impact on all of us. It will weaken the West, and it will of course also weaken the dominance of NATO in the long term. There's an economic decline. I mean, when you look at the 15 states in the world which are most indebted, 10 of them are NATO countries, and they are the big NATO countries, and countries like Japan and South Korea. So there is no money, and I think that will even become worse when we see that there's an increase in the de-dollarization. I'm not saying that it will all happen at the same time, but of course there's a movement now that will make the dollar weaker and the American control over the dollar weaker, and the indebtedness will be very hardly felt by these countries. We also see that on the weapon production, I mean, this is an economic issue. The United States cannot easily reproduce the weapons they have now spent in Ukraine and especially in Iran. So this is they have a deindustrialization taking place because of globalization, also in Europe, of course, that makes it very difficult for them now to keep a weapon production that allows them to continue all these wars. And of course, we have BRICS. And we have Russia as partner now in all these new economic developments around the world, and it's not at all isolated. And if you look at the European Union, for instance, I think the European Union is increasingly isolated. And then we have the political thing. I mean, first of all, the transatlantic split. I mean, the trouble we have with the United States, between Europe and the United States, is serious. I mean, even we say that we, in the end, will depend on them. There is the issue of Greenland. There's the differences on the Iran war. There's a difference on the Ukraine war. There's a whole issue about how we deal with Israel and Gaza and sort of things. So I think that will weaken this combination, therefore also NATO, and now it takes, of all places, takes place in Turkey. I mean, Turkey has such a different agenda now from NATO on Israel, on Gaza, on Lebanon, on Iran, and it has its own regional interests. It is now not anymore linked as much as we were before. We should not forget. I mean, when they meet, it will be 40 years ago that they asked to become member of the European Union, or I think it's 39 years ago. And now they have a candidate like Ukraine who's also participating, who we promise somehow a speedy membership of the European Union. I mean, all those things might increase on all the divisions. In Europe itself, we have extremely weak leaders. I mean, Starmer is now just leaving. I'm not sure that the next one will be much stronger. We have Macron is about to leave, also a weak leader. And we have, of course, Merz, all people which have a very low approval rating in their own countries. And actually their decision-making is, by all these things, very hampered. I especially want to draw attention to the German separate military strategy, which was just issued by the government. I mean, it's the first time that we have a separate military strategy, and that is, of course, also undermining in a way NATO, because until now it was NATO strategy Germany adhered to. Now we have our own. We always say, we combine, but it means, of course, something else. There is a division, and there will be also with this strategy also the division in Europe. My conclusion is that we might go into a world where we have extremely weakened institutions like NATO, like the European Union, etc., while we have at the same time a militarization that increases enormously. So I would say, if we have a future, it will be very anarchic, and therefore it's a very dangerous future. And I hope that somehow we can solve this all before it sort of overtakes us the events, and we end up in war. And if we look at the rhetoric we have between Russia and Germany in particular, it looks as if the war is just around the corner. Okay, thank you very much. Is it 8 minutes?
Less.
Oh, lovely. So I
Less.
get a
Well
bonus.
done. Thank you so much, Michael. That's brilliant. Okay, so turning now to our next speaker, it's a pleasure to welcome Oleg Bodorov from Russia. Oleg is a physicist, ecologist, and longtime peace and environmental activist from St. Petersburg. He chairs the Public Council of the southern coast of the Gulf of Finland, which is an interregional environmental movement uniting communities in Leningrad Oblast and St. Petersburg. He's also a board member of the IPB and coordinator of the Baltic Civil Peace Initiative, a Russian network working to preserve peace and the environment in the Baltic Sea region. Welcome, Oleg, over to you.
Thank you, colleagues.
Good, go ahead.
Good evening. Do you listen to me?
Yeah, fine, go ahead.
Okay. So, colleagues, my country has been labeled an enemy, but I do not speak for the state. I speak for physicists and ecologists. And I speak like a part of the Russian society who see a common threat. My main point is simple. Militarization is not protection. It is collective suicide.
Yes.
And the law of physics and the biosphere do not recognize border. This is my main point for my speech. Today we are discussing how far European, including Russia, leaders have come. I think they are already at acceptable risk. The Baltic region, where I live now, has been turned into military base, record military budgets, endless military exercises, deployment of new weapons. All this happened in the ecologically sensitive Baltic basin. A few numbers. For world's armies account for 5.5% of global greenhouse emissions. So the military sector is the fourth largest emitter after China, the United States, and India. And now we have escalation of the militarization. And my focus now will be on the Baltic Sea region. Almost daily, Ukrainian drones attack Russia from NATO countries in the Baltic region. So it means that really Baltic states, NATO countries already participate in the war with Russia. These drones exploding near the nuclear power plants in my city, and I have calculated that the spent nuclear fuel of these nuclear power plants contains more than 2 billion lethal dose of the plutonium-239 with half-life of 24,000 years. If there are direct military actions involving NATO countries in the Baltic Sea region, there is a high risk that more than 30 nuclear power plants, reactors, and nuclear waste storage facilities could be destroyed. This means that it will be collapse of the lives for 90 million people in 9 countries, including Russia. I think it is this is more dangerous than long lasting than atomic bomb explosion. A year ago, year and a half ago, Russia deployed tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. 2 days ago, Finland removed the barrier to the deployment of the nuclear weapons on its territory. And today, the deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, said that Finland has become a potential target for the Russian nuclear strike. It was announced today. Thus, European politicians hope to win the use nuclear weapons. But now let's discuss about consequences of the ideology of the readiness for war. The image of Russia and China as enemies is a dangerous construct. It is a machine for the acceleration of the arms race. As a physicist, I will remind you an important fact. Back in the 1980s, Nikita Moiseev and Carl Sagan showed that the limited nuclear exchange world a nuclear winter. Modern research confirms this. After the 100 nuclear explosions will be a global climate shock. Crop failures, hunger, hundreds of millions of people will die. Europe will freeze to death. Russia will do the same. The politicians are silent about this. Maybe they don't understand the law of physics, or they are criminally ignoring them. So a war with Russia is not a victory. It is a guaranteed death for everyone. Now I talk about the political and economical transformation in our countries. Transformation, the war against nature. There are structure changes in the economy and social sphere. Europe, including Russia, is militarizing industry, science, and education. Universities are receiving the military grants. Schools are introducing military training. Russia spent about 50% of the budget for war and the security forces. Social and environmental programs are being cut. Cross-border projects of science are frozen. Nature losses, science losses, people on both sides of the border loss. What can we do? Russian civil society is not silent. Our Baltic Civil Peace Initiative brings together with the scientists, environmentalists, and human rights activists. I think we need the Baltic Civil Society Conference. The Baltic Civil Peace Initiative is working with the colleagues from Germany, with Rainer and his colleagues, and with other countries in the Baltic region. We want to organize such online conference. We plan to do it in November in this year. And conclusions. Colleagues, I appeal to you from St. Petersburg. The city has survived the blockade during the Second World War. We know the price of war. The planet does not choose anyone's side of the conflict. Nature has no support. Either we stop the war machine together or we will die together. The choice is ours. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oleg, and thank you for those powerful closing words. So turning now to our final speaker, it's a pleasure to welcome Paul Murphy from Ireland. Paul is an Irish politician and socialist activist. He served as a TD in the Irish Parliament since 2014. He's a member of People Before Profit and is known for his advocacy on workers' rights, housing, public services, climate justice, and opposition to austerity. Before entering the Irish Parliament, Paul was a member of the European Parliament from 2011 to 2014. So big welcome to you, Paul.
Hi, Kate. Thanks, everybody, and hi, comrades. Very nice to be amongst you all, even if we're talking about something not very pleasant and very scary, as Oleg has described very well. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Ireland in order, I think, to underline the point that even though our different countries, our different political spaces are at different stages of the road, fundamentally, we're pretty much all on the same road, which is heading towards accelerated militarization, massive increases in military expenditure, and deeper integration into NATO, or closer and closer to NATO as part of a Western imperialist alliance. Because Ireland is, in a sense, of where it's currently at, is different than other European countries. We are formally neutral. We are not members of NATO, although we are members of Partnership for Peace, which is a NATO alliance, effectively. But the truth is that, for a long time, the political establishment in Ireland, which identifies deeply with US imperialism, with the European project, have seen neutrality as a kind of embarrassing holdover of our anti-colonial past, which they have undermined in practice over decades, like being part of Partnership for Peace, and like in reality being part of the European Union, like facilitating the transport of US soldiers to Iraq and Afghanistan through Irish airports over decades. But effectively, with the invasion of Ukraine, they have seen an opportunity to really accelerate the undermining of neutrality and the integration into the Western camp, which obviously economically they are entirely already integrated into. Effectively, I think that war on neutrality in Ireland has taken three different fronts: one rhetorical, another creating facts on the ground, and a third legislative. The rhetoric, I'm sure, is similar to what you see in your countries, which is a massive scaremongering campaign about the threat of Russia. So even though we are the westernmost country in Europe, we are told about a major threat on our doorsteps. We're treated pretty much on a weekly basis to scare stories about Russia's shadow fleet, so-called, with the implication that this is some very, very scary thing, as opposed to just ships that are being sanctioned by the US for their own reasons. A good example is when Vladimir Zelensky visited Ireland. There was a huge story in the media about drones in his flight path after his flight had already landed. The media reported briefings from Irish security sources blaming Russia, but we asked for the footage from the army and the parliament, and we're told no footage will ever be released. We're told all the time about the dangers to our subsea cables, which in reality are owned by big tech corporations. And we're told that we have to be mature. On TV just the other day, a minister said we can't be investing in schools and homes because we need to increase our defense spending. Ironically, I mean, they use the fear of Putin, but they also try to use the fear of Trump to say we need to be part of Europe, we need to be independent, even though the whole European militarization project in reality is subordinate through NATO to Trump. The other day in the Parliament, the Prime Minister said, we're not joining NATO anytime soon, which I think gives you a good sense of, okay, this is a long-term project. It's almost a kind of honest expression. Originally, at the invasion of Ukraine, they said we need to now have an honest discussion about neutrality and do we need to move beyond neutrality. That didn't go down well. Public opinion remained firmly in favor of neutrality. So instead, what they've done is to redefine neutrality, where neutrality in their mind encompasses anything up to full membership of a military alliance. So you can participate in a NATO-led invasion of a country, and as long as you're not formally in NATO, you are still neutral. Literally, that's how they now define neutrality. Secondly, quickly, creating facts on the ground. They're planning to triple military expenditure in Ireland from a low basis, and they've started that process. Its military expenditure is rising faster than any other part of government expenditure. They have used Ukraine to erode de facto almost all of what is left of neutrality. So Irish troops have been involved in training soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers involved in a war. We have sent military aid to Ukraine. This is supposedly non-lethal military aid, which is an entirely Jesuitical, meaningless distinction. But even this non-military aid included the offer of armored vehicles with grenade launchers on them, but supposedly this is still non-lethal. Ireland has been deeply involved in the Ukraine Defence Contact Group, which meets in NATO headquarters, which is a kind of outrunner of NATO. Ireland has taken over the presidency of the European Council, and as part of that, and I read from the strategy, it says the Irish presidency will advance work on the measures set out in the white paper on the future of European defence and the associated defence readiness roadmap. So a supposedly neutral country is president of the European Council and has three priorities: competitiveness, values, and security, and is signed up to all these measures to accelerate the increase in European spending. Thirdly, finally, is legislative. They have the one thing that prevents Irish troops being sent abroad on missions outside the framework of international law is something called the triple lock. The triple lock says that for troops to be sent abroad, it needs to be agreed by the government, it needs to be voted on by the parliament, and it has to be in a mission that is authorized by the UN. In other words, that's what international law says. They want to get rid of this on the grounds that that gives Putin a veto, when in fact it simply says we will only send troops abroad within the framework of international law, and we say, well, you want to get rid of this because you want to send troops abroad outside of the framework of international law, which is very clear. I just finish on this to say that we do have weapons on our side. Public opinion strongly still in defense of neutrality. Secondly, a massive Palestine solidarity movement and a public that have seen the reality of what NATO is about, the reality of what European imperialism is about in terms of the support for genocide. And then thirdly, a major campaign to defend our triple lock, so much so that the government was planning to do it now before the European presidency and has been forced to delay it until later this year because of opposition within one of the two ruling parties. So there is some hope. Thanks, comrades.
Thanks very much indeed. That's brilliant. So now over to you, the people, to ask your questions to our fantastic panel. So who would like to go first? Okay, Linda Walker, over to you.
Well, thank you very much to all the brilliant speakers. And it was really good to hear Oleg talking more about environmental issues. And it seems to me that whichever country we live in, we've all got this massive propaganda from almost all the politicians, the media, all the top military people, all saying, you know, if you want any kind of future, you have to go onto a war footing. And we all know it's bonkers, but it's being said every day. So it's just entering into people's consciousness. So if we could all together be talking about real security for people, which obviously is partly their social security and having a hospital and a school for their kids, etc. But it's also the fact that climate change is the biggest threat to the future of all of us, whichever country we live in. And most people are really aware of that. And we've got to sort of resist this propaganda. So it seems to me the strongest argument against greater defence spending is that that's going to do more damage to the planet in itself. It's going to take away the resources we need to tackle climate and to meet our people's needs. And it's going to increase tension between countries. So we cannot come together as we have to do if we're going to tackle the climate crisis. So I hope that can be part of the argument that we all come together on, that we need to be talking not about defence, but about real security, common security, and human security. It wasn't really a question, I'm sorry, but if you could say a bit more about how you think we can make that a big issue for people. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Linda, and I'm certainly in total agreement with you on that. I'm sure there's a lot of support for this out there. So turning now to our next speaker, we've got Ingvar Ronbach.
Yes.
Ingvar, over to you.
Thank you. I had a question from the first set of speakers also, coming to Sweden, that we have in our history politicians who had argued for common security, for disarmament and many other things. At the same time, we have also delivered weapons to many places in the world. So we have a problematic history in large sense. But today I see so little political courage among political parties and individual politicians who was resisting these trends. And I wonder if anyone in this among the speakers could sort of resonate why so. Maybe you have other experience in different countries, but we see almost none, even in the Environment Party and Left Party and Social Democratic Party and so on, who's actually having a strong voice and a clear message regarding all of the things that you're talking about: human security, common security, support of the UN, whatever. They are not there and supporting us from the civil society and the citizen to provide a counter narrative. We are very, very lonely now in the civil society, and the media is not supporting us either. So where is the courage and why is it so?
Thanks very much, Ingvar. Thank you. Next, over to Kamri Gomi.
Yes, thank you. I was just in Oleg's comments, I was very happy that he invoked the rights of nature and the whole aspect of the natural world. And we're not here, we're the species that is destroying everything, but we're not the only species on the planet, although we act as if we have this dominance mindset. But I'm wondering about, we had a speaker at our chapter a long time ago called John Foster. He's I think he's a Brit who worked in the petroleum industry for years and years. And he wrote a book about the connection between war and fossil fuel, exploration, and how the oil companies were behind. And you could sort of map all the wars from the oil companies' interests at various times in history. And, that always stayed with me, and I still see the connection. But people act as if there's an environmental movement and there's peace movement, and they're kind of like, on parallel roads, but actually it's the same movement. It's the same, because a lot of these wars are being fought for minerals, now for rare earth minerals, for high tech, or for oil, to keep the fossil fuel industry even going. If we just continued on addressing climate change, fossil fuels would have naturally been a thing of the past. There's people that don't want that to happen. So they're doing everything that they can, including inventing AI and foisting all these things. And we act as if this is all normal. And this is all just in the course of things. We don't even realize that we're being manipulated, constantly, and that there's a very small cohort of like 3% of the population that's doing this, that's behind this. So we should be able to, we're 97%. We should be able to save the world. I mean, we're most of the people on the world, but I think that one of the keys to doing that, and I wondered what Oleg would say about that, is how we can make people aware of the intersectionality of things like climate, war, environment. I mean, these wars are all being fought by people who have who are mentally ill, who are psychopaths, who don't understand the long view. They have a very liberal short-term view of the world, and they want everything very fast before we can figure out what they're doing. And they're leading us all, sleep running us to Armageddon. So I wondered if you could talk about how we could wake people up to the intersectionality of all these different issues, and we could all pull together and put the what's his name, Elon Musk's of the world in their place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over now to Dave Mullinix.
Oh, aloha from Hawaii. Thank you so much for this the summit. It's brilliant. NATO is way beyond what's happening in Europe. It is all the way here in the Pacific. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is here in the Pacific. They're being involved in the RIMPAC. It's military exercises, and I think 8 of the 10 European countries in NATO are in RIMPAC. The U.S. is the terrorist of the world. I'm from the United States, and we are the international terrorists. And we have 800 bases around the world. We're the only country in the world that has that many bases. We have the biggest military budget in the world. We are totally militarized. We recently had a bill here in Hawaii to start indoctrinating children as early as kindergarten on how the military would be a great career and a great way to move forward. We are so militarized here in the United States, and so I want to thank all of you for what you're doing. We are desperately need your help because we are basically the bad guys, not Russia. Russia has, I think, maybe 20 military bases around the world, and theirs are all around Russia. They're basically responding to us. So I have a question for you, but I don't know how to put it. But I just want to thank you because RIMPAC is coming here pretty soon, and in fact, it's happening now. And so we need to be working together. So how can we help you? How can we work together? Our peace movement is kind of fledgling. It's been around for quite a while, but it's tiny. And so the more we can work together with you, the more we can help each other. I think this is the only thing. It's the people who are going to make the difference. And so how can we work together? What plans can we do to have more things like this happening, to educate people how desperate, because like she said, the climate is being destroyed because of the wars. We're going to, the U.S. military alone, and just using the fossil fuels unit, are going to change and destroy their climate through climate change, through all its efforts. So, bad efforts by that man. Anyway, so thank you so much. And how can we work together more closely? We need to build a stronger coalition internationally, working together. And I'm sorry if I went on too long.
No, thanks very much, Dave. That's great. And then Ulla, over to you.
Okay, I'm Ulla Klösser from Finland, unfortunately, active in Women for Peace and in Global Women for Peace United Against NATO, one. And I want to comment on what Letizia and Oleg said about the nuclear umbrella being now spread all over the Nordic countries and the Baltic countries by France, and of course also by the US, and the unfortunate vote we had in the Finnish parliament end of May about opening up for nuclear weapons on Finnish soil. And that means both US and French weapons. But I see some hope, Ingvar, in Sweden, because you have elections in autumn. And it looks like the Social Democrats and the left are going to take the scene. And we will have parliament elections in Finland in spring. And it also looks like we will get a left-green, red-green government if we are lucky. And then we should start pushing because Sweden has said yes to this umbrella. Finland had said yes to having nuclear weapons on its soil. But we have a very, very strong tradition. We have Olof Palme, who several times talked about the nuclear-free zone in the Nordic countries, in Europe also. We have Urho Kekkonen, a long-time president in Finland, who did this same proposition several times. And we should just now start pushing for this tradition of social democratic and center party values. And we could get support from all over Europe, I suppose. And we have, as Michael von der Schulenburg said, NATO is getting weaker. We have weak leaders. We have to create space for stronger leaders. And these leaders have to have something to bite on, because now everybody knows that we have too big military budgets, social expenditure is going cut off. So we have to support single, even if I hate politicians, I'm sorry, Michael, but I don't like politicians.
I'm not a politician.
Oh, yes,
not a politician.
in a way you are. But I think we have to pick up some persons we can support and start pushing. We are all, most of us, old and tired, but it doesn't give us a reason for giving up. So I think we should really, really try to do that. Okay. And to whoever talked about climate change and we have to do that. The peace movement has tried several times for years to get into contact with the climate movement, and we have. One has had a webinar on climate change and military expenditures, and we have to take that up repeatedly. We have just to be persistent. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ulla. And then our final contributor from the floor is Ivan Cormier-Scott, and then we'll turn to our speakers for their responses. Ivan, over to you. Can you hear me? We can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, he knows we can't hear him, but I don't think he's got a solution. Can you put your comments in the chat, please, if you can hear me? Put your comments in the chat. And then I'll and then I will ask our speakers to look at your comment or question and respond to that when they come back. So thank you very much for that. Sorry about that not working. Okay, so now speakers. Is Letitia still here?
Yes. Do you hear me?
You're not. Yes, you're just not showing on my screen. That's all. So, okay. So, Letitia, would you like to go first and answer any points you'd like to in about 2 or 3 minutes?
Okay. To respond to an intervention, right-wing politicians in France, including the far right, attach little importance to climate change issues, focusing instead on military security and specifically targeting Russia as the enemy. Many media outlets in France are controlled by billionaires, making it increasingly difficult for democracy to function effectively. But we have a lot of resources for raising consensus to convince that it's possible to move towards cooperation and break free for American tutelage. The debate of NATO exists in several Europe countries. Other countries are neutral. They are the point from and dissolution of NATO to build Europe for the people. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Letitia. So just before I take the next speaker, just to let you know that Ivan, who couldn't be heard, he's made a comment there in chat: climate funding for the global south as a way to help tackle climate change and also de-escalate the global situation. So take that into account when you're coming back there. Michael, your words?
Yeah, I must say, I don't know what to say. I know the first time that I'm a politician. I haven't thought of it, maybe I am because I'm in the parliament, but since 2 years. It's an awful place, I must say. I spent all my life in war countries, actually, for the UN and things like this one. So maybe that's why I wasn't a politician. No, I don't know. If I'm, don't forget, I mean, the world is going towards a certain anarchy. I mean, we have now the West, who doesn't seem to recognize anymore the UN Charter and the international law. We have a president of the United States who says it's only his own emotions which will decide that. We have a Canadian prime minister who even welcomes it, saying, that's all false, these values and things like this one. It's always the strongest who wins and things like this one. We have no reductions of armaments anymore. We have no contracts anymore on arms controls. We have no contracts anymore on confidence building measures in the world. All the things we have built up at the end of the Cold War and so on, it's all gone now. And we have at the same time a normal militarization. So I'm really desperate. I don't really know how we do that. I'm traveling a lot through Germany because I'm asked to speak. But if I look at it, what happened over the last 2 years, participation has dropped. I think the interest in these things have dropped. I don't know why. We have it more and more difficult to be published anywhere in the media. So I think it is actually all, I have no answers to it. I think it's actually quite desperate, the whole thing.
Okay, thanks for those.
No, thank you. You don't have to thank me for this one. It's nothing to be thanked for. But I just want to be honest. I'm sitting in this parliament up in the forum and hear these parliamentarians. I mean, I'm the only one who's seen war for 30 years, wars, and know what it means. And I have all these parliamentarians who take a warm coffee in the morning, take a shower, coming then into parliament and vote for resolutions, which is basically to continue wars. And it's not their children, it's not their blood who they're spoiled and things like this one. And there's 719 deputies who basically, I think 600 think like this. It's unbelievable. And if I have my 1 minute speech, I get boos, and it's what it is. And it's desperate. I must say, I find the situation quite desperate. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's hope we can get some ideas and further regenerate ourselves from this webinar this evening.
Yeah, I think it's a deeper problem. It's not an ideas problem. It's a deeper problem.
Okay,
Why we in the West we don't have political participation.
Lacking in positive optimism here, Michael. So there you go. Anyway, so I'll just point to a further remark by Ivan in the chat, who says, also, surely we need anti-NATO protests as soon as possible. And I think I would just say that there does seem to be been a slight decline in anti-NATO protests recently. And this is the time when we need more anti-NATO protests. And of course, online webinars are very good for enabling people to come together when they can't actually get, say, to Istanbul. Of course, the Ankara thing was banned, so doing things in person are very important. But I think we all need to remember the importance of really continuing to raise the anti-NATO struggle in our own countries, as well as working to coordinate across Europe. And I would just say to anyone who's not already signed up for NATO or No to NATO mailings and so on, please do so and get more involved with our network. We are trying to regenerate and rebuild to meet the moment. So please do join us if you can. Over to you, Oleg, now. You're still muted, I'm afraid.
Okay. I like very much the comment from Ula that now we have election campaign in Russia too. It will be in September. And now we're working with the candidate for the national parliament and regional parliament. And it's important to formulate message for the new candidate, for the new deputies. And one idea I remember, and this idea, present very famous physicist, he said, Albert Einstein, he said that if the system have a crisis, it's not possible to find a way out from the crisis if the same stakeholders, the same politicians will do it. So we need to formulate the message how to provide safety, security and safety. And now it's not possible to find solution only for the military security or social security. We need a combination, military security, social and environmental security. And it's reasonable if we will mobilize for the preparation special documents for the people in one ecological regions. My idea is it's reasonable if we will provide such a report which is oriented on the target group for the all people in the Baltic region, and to show, to present how it's possible to find solutions of the common security. And we hope to discuss it on the conference which we organize in November in this year. And I'd like to invite colleagues from the Baltic region to be a part of this process, because now we already started for the preparation of this conference. And I hope it to involve to this process not only activists, peace movement and environmental activists, but also the members of the parliament and scientists. So we need different stakeholders from different social groups to be part of this process. This is main idea. And thank you so much for this chance to speak with you today from the enemy of Russia.
Thank you.
Nice one there, yeah. Very nice one.
Really appreciate that. Thank you. So, Paul, over to you for final words, please.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, maybe 3 quick points. Firstly, just to very much agree with the comrades who brought central the ecological dimension. I mean, I think this is just so important for our analysis, but also our agitation, that we have this extremely limited carbon budget. And if we waste it on weapons that are going to worsen the climate crisis, will then the hope for a livable future for our children and grandchildren is very quickly diminishing. So I think we need to just consistently bring that ecological dimension into the anti-war message. Secondly, on the question of why are we relatively isolated, and certainly in terms of amongst the political parties, like social democratic parties, broadly left parties, like I've seen in Scandinavia and so on, largely rolling over to the pro-NATO propaganda. I mean, Ireland is interesting because we have quite a broad coalition in defense of neutrality, which ourselves and People for Profit, but also Sinn Féin, Social Democrats, the Labour Party, the Greens, would defend the triple lock and defend the idea of Irish neutrality. But on the question of opposing increases in military expenditure, we are entirely isolated. And it's the same sort of process in a different context, where I think basically all of the others who are with us on neutrality, and maybe with us secretly in their own hearts on the question of militarization, they feel they have no alternative when confronted with the propaganda that says it's only common sense that we have to spend more on military. We're living in a more dangerous world. You can't stand up to that. You have to say, oh yes, of course we have to spend more. Even though, and to be clear, in an Irish context, it makes no sense separated from the NATO agenda. They want us to get into this discussion about how can Ireland defend itself, because they know a country like Ireland can never defend itself against any major imperialist power. And therefore, the answer is, well, we have to be in a military alliance to defend ourselves. If we accept the question, that's where the whole discussion leads. And it's also about increasing expenditure to a point where we could be accepted into membership of NATO in the future. So I think in a sense, it's a lack of political courage to stand up to the massive propaganda offensive. And secondly, it's a not having an alternative worldview, a consistent worldview, which says we're in a Western imperialist camp and we need to oppose that camp. But I think these parties can be put under pressure. And then just finally, in terms of the hopeful message, I mean, how can we energize the anti-war movements? Like in Ireland, if we call protests around defense of the triple lock or defense of neutrality, we get good crowds, but generally older crowds. You compare that to the movement on Palestine, which is overwhelmingly young. I mean, it's all ages, but very young, very energetic, etc. And I do think there's a task there. Like in Ireland, certainly, thousands of new activists have been created by the Palestine solidarity movement. People who were not previously politically active are now active. And I think we have a real task of connecting they've become aware about a world shaped by imperialism and the horrors that flow from that, and win them to a broader anti-imperialist analysis, anti-imperialist vision, and anti-imperialist campaigning, and bring that energy into the broader anti-NATO, anti-war movement, I think is a big challenge for us. And I think that is a part of the solution in terms of building dynamic movements that can win. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Paul. 100% agree with you. And that's very much our experience here in Britain, about this incredibly dynamic Palestine movement and making the links and bringing people in and helping to build the wider anti-war movement. So huge thank you to all our speakers this evening. You've been fantastic. Thank you to all the participants, everyone who's joined us, asked such good questions and stimulated the debate. Big thank you to Michelle on tech. Brilliant as always. And just to remind you, we have the next part of our NATO Counter Summit after the NATO Summit. So we'll be able to assess and discuss moving forward from across the movement. So that is on July the 3rd between 3 and 5 p.m. Central European time. So please do register again. Big thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.